The signal arrived at 0317 station time, and Dr. Mara Voss was the only one awake to hear it. She had not slept in 31 hours. That was not unusual for her. Sleep, she had told her colleagues on more than one occasion, was a luxury she reserved for people who had already done what they came to do. She had not done it yet. The thing on the table in Lab 7 was proof enough of that. She pulled her headset off and held it in both hands, staring at the waveform on her monitor. The signal was not random noise. She had spent the last 4 years listening to random noise. The cosmic breath of dead stars, faint electrical complaints of the station's aging hull, and this was not that. This had rhythm. This had intention. This came from somewhere inside the ship's own systems, from the sealed compartment on Deck 4 that the Veth had told them, very politely and very firmly, was not their concern. Mara put the headset back on and listened again. It was breathing. Not the mechanical bellows pump of a ventilation system. Not the slow oscillation of a heat exchanger. Something was breathing on Deck 4. Long and slow and patient, the way a very large thing breathes when it is simply waiting. She saved the recording, cross-referenced it against 3 different biological signature databases, found no match, and then did something that her training and her contract and 4 years of careful, professional conduct all argued strongly against. She went down to Deck 4 to look. The Veth had come to Earth 7 years ago, and they had not come in the way any of the old stories predicted. There were no war machines descending through burning clouds. There were no demands broadcast across every frequency. There was, instead, a single vessel of extraordinary beauty, parked in high orbit above the Sahara. And from that vessel a delegation of 12 beings descended in a craft so quiet that it landed in the desert with less disturbance than a heron, settling onto still water. The Veth were tall, 2.5 meters, most of them, and they moved with a slowness that read at first as arrogance, and later, once people began to understand them better, as extreme physical care. Each Veth body was in their own words a construction, an achievement, not born assembled, over processes that could take decades, from biological materials that were themselves designed rather than grown. They had no word in their primary language for accident. They did not appear to have a concept for it. They were unfailingly polite. They offered technology. They asked, in return, partnership, a joint research station orbiting at L2, staffed equally by human and Veth scientists, studying what they called, in translation, deep architecture of living matter. The UN said yes within 6 months. Most people thought this was reasonable. A vocal minority thought it was suicide. Mara, at the time a postdoc in synthetic neurology at Heidelberg, read every public document from the negotiations and concluded that the truth was probably somewhere more interesting than either camp imagined. She applied for a position on the joint station. She got it. She spent the next 4 years trying to understand what the Veth actually wanted, because the deep architecture of living matter was not something you could study in a general sense. You had to be studying something specific, and the Veth had never been clear about what exactly they were hoping to find until Deck 4. The door to the sealed compartment had no lock that Mara could see. There was only a panel of what appeared to be biological material, something pale and faintly veined, warm to the touch, embedded in the wall beside the frame. She had walked past it 100 times. She had once asked her Veth colleague Saren about it, and Saren had given her the answer they always gave when the question touched on something they did not wish to discuss. A very precise, very complete answer about something adjacent to the actual question, delivered with such grace that it took Mara 3 days to realize she had been redirected. Saren was not here now. It was 0341, and the Veth worked on a 31-hour cycle, and at this point in their cycle they were all in the rest state that was not quite sleep, in their quarters on the far side of the station. Mara was alone on Deck 4. She put her hand flat against the biological panel. It was warm. It pulsed once, faintly under her palm, and then the door opened. She had expected a laboratory. What she found was a garden. Something arranged with the same logic as a garden. Growth guided and shaped toward specific purposes. Beauty and function so deeply entwined that the distinction lost meaning. The space was larger than it should have been given the station's floor plan. The ceiling was high enough that she had to look up twice to be sure of what she was seeing. Translucent filaments hung from above like frozen rain, each one faintly luminescent, connected at irregular intervals to objects she could not immediately identify, structures that might have been machinery or organs, or both simultaneously, pulsing with a slow light, the color of deep-sea bioluminescence. In the center of the room, on a platform that was itself alive, she could see the cellular regularity of it even from the door. The surface breathing with minute contractions lay a form. Mara walked toward it. The form was human in outline. You could see that from across the room. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. The proportions were right. The scale was right. As she got closer, she could see the details that were also right. The structure of the face, the architecture of the rib cage, visible through the translucent material that covered it like a second skin. The hands, specifically the hands, were extraordinary. Each finger articulated with a precision that looked not assembled but grown. She stood at the edge of the platform and looked down at the thing that the Veth had made. And she felt, very clearly and without any ambiguity, afraid, not because it was monstrous, because it was not. She went back to her lab. She sat for a while without turning on the lights. Then she pulled up her private research files, the ones she had never shared with Saren, or with Administrator Core, or with the Joint Oversight Committee. And she started reading. It had started as a professional habit and become something else. 4 years of watching the Veth work had given her data points that, individually, meant nothing, and collectively, meant something she was not sure she wanted to know. The way they studied human tissue samples, not for pathology, but for what they called in translation the original grammar. The questions Saren had asked her, early on, about human experience of continuity, about what it felt like, from the inside, to be the same person across time. The anomalous energy readings from Deck 4, that her instruments registered as biological activity at a scale that did not match any of the Veth personnel aboard. She pulled up the recording she had made an hour ago, the breathing sound. She ran it through her analysis software and looked at the output for a long time. The respiration rate was approximately 15 breaths per minute, testing human average, 12 to 20. The rhythm had the slight irregularity of biological breathing rather than mechanical simulation. Chemical signature of the exhalation, faint but detectable through the environmental sensors, was within normal human parameters. Whatever was on that platform, it was alive, and it was breathing like a person. She thought about waking Dr. Fenn, closest colleague among the human staff. She thought about filing a report with Administrator Core. She thought about the 6 months of bureaucratic process that would follow. The Veth's patient, graceful, entirely thorough management of any official inquiry, and the outcome, which would be nothing confirmed, nothing disproven, and Mara quietly reassigned to a ground posting. She did not wake Fenn. She did not file a report. She went back to Deck 4. She brought a portable scanner this time. She also brought the flask of coffee she had been working on for 3 hours. Because she was a practical person, and she did not see why field research should preclude caffeine, she stood at the edge of the platform and ran the scanner slowly over the form, watching the readout. The readings were extraordinary, not inhuman. That was the wrong word entirely. The readings were human. Every biological signature came back within normal range. Brainwave activity in the delta band consistent with deep sleep. Core temperature 37.1 Celsius. Cellular structure throughout the body, showing normal replication rates, normal telomere lengths, normal mitochondrial function. There was one anomaly. At the base of the skull, at the junction of the brainstem and the spinal cord, there was a structure that did not match any human anatomy she knew. It was small, 3 centimeters at its largest dimension, and it appeared to be growing very slowly into the surrounding neural tissue, growing in, not on, it. As if it had been designed to become part of the system rather than an addition to it. She was still looking at this reading when the form opened its eyes. They were dark brown. They blinked once, the slow deliberateness of someone surfacing from a very deep place, and then they looked at Mara. She did not run. She was proud of that later. At the time, she was too busy being incapable of movement to feel proud of it. She stood at the edge of the platform and looked back into those dark brown eyes, and felt the particular quality of intelligence in them, the recognition, the orientation, the careful reading of the room, and understood two things simultaneously. First was that whatever the Veth had built, they had built it with a mind. The second was that the mind was frightened. "Hello," she said. It was not the most sophisticated opening, but it was what she had. The form. The person, she was already thinking of them as a person. The mind in her would not stop insisting on it. The person looked at her for another 3 seconds and then spoke. "Hello." The voice was low, slightly rough with disuse, the accent unplaceable. The single word was delivered with an attentiveness that made Mara feel that the speaker was listening very carefully to their own voice, taking its measure. "I'm Mara," she said. "Mara Voss. I'm a researcher on this station. A human researcher." Another pause. "I know what you are." A breath. "I wasn't sure there would be any." Any humans? Any humans who would come. Mara thought about the door which she had opened by accident, and chose not to mention it. "Can you move?" A slow attempt. The arms first. Lifting from the platform, joints moving through their ranges with the cautious testing of someone checking an unfamiliar instrument. Person sat up by degrees, each movement precise, considered, as though great care had been taken to understand the mechanics of each joint before trusting it with weight. When they were finally upright, cross-legged on the platform, looking at Mara at eye level, she had a better sense of the proportions. Slightly taller than average, lean, the face androgynous in the way of a technical drawing. All structure, excess. "What's your name?" Mara asked. A long pause. "I don't know if I have one. Does that bother you?" And considered this, with the same care they had applied to every other thing so far. "I think it would bother me more if I knew and had forgotten." "Fair enough." Mara looked at her scanner. She looked at the person. She made a decision. "I'm going to call you something for now, if that's all right. Not permanently. Just so we don't have to keep having this conversation." The person waited. "Cain," Mara said. It was her brother's name. He had died when she was 19. Long before any of this, and she missed him in the way you miss something that was part of your architecture. Not cutely, most days, but structurally. She did not know why she said his name, she said it anyway. "Cain," the person repeated, with the same listening quality, taking the word's measure, all right. She came back every night for 11 nights. She did not tell anyone. This was, she understood, a very significant professional failing, and possibly also a personal one, and she spent a great deal of time during those 11 days considering this fact and continuing to do the thing anyway. Cain was not dangerous. She was certain of this, in the way that she was certain of experimental results, that she could not yet fully explain. Not because she had proven it, because the data kept pointing the same direction. What Cain was learning. In 11 days, Cain absorbed everything Mara could give. Her explanations of the station's structure and function, human history in rough outline, current political situation regarding the Veth's presence on Earth, the basic facts of biology, chemistry, physics. Cain asked questions with a precision that was slightly unsettling. Not the broad questions of someone building a model of the world, but the narrow, surgical questions of someone identifying the specific gap between what they have been given and what they actually need to know. On the 4th night, Cain asked about the structure at the base of their skull. "I can feel it," Cain said, "not painfully. I'm aware of it, in the same way I'm aware of my heartbeat, as something that's running. It appears to be integrating with your nervous system," said, choosing her words, growing into it. "What does it do?" "I don't know. The Veth built it. I haven't been able to ask them about it without revealing." She stopped. "Without revealing that you know about me, yes." Cain looked at her, with the steady, undemanding attention that she had come to understand was their version of patience. "You're protecting me." "I'm protecting the situation," Mara said, which was true and also not the whole truth. On the 7th night, Cain asked her why she kept coming back. She had been expecting the question. She had several answers prepared, all of them partially true. She gave them the honest one instead. "Because you're a person," she said, "and no one else knows that." Cain was quiet for a moment, then, "How do you know? How do I know you're a person?" "Yes." She thought about it properly, which she respected herself for. "Because you're afraid," she finally said. "And not of the wrong things. You're afraid of the right things. That takes judgment. Can looked at her hands. I was afraid the first night. When I opened my eyes and you were there, I know you hid it well. No, I didn't. No, Mara agreed. You didn't. On the 12th night, Saren was waiting in the corridor outside Lab 7. Mara had known this moment would come. She had told herself she was prepared for it. She discovered, standing in the corridor with her coffee flask and her scanner, and the 11 nights of illegal research in her head, that she was not particularly prepared at all. Saren was one of the older Veth aboard. Their bodies carried more of the accumulation of deliberate modification that marked age in their species, the additional structures visible in the layering of their features, the architecture more complex and less readable to eye than the younger Veth. Saren was also the closest thing Mara had to a friend among them. She thought of Saren as a friend. She did not know what Saren thought of her, but they had worked together for 3 years, and Saren had on 2 occasions brought her food when she had forgotten to eat, which she counted as something. Dr. Voss, Saren said. Veth did not have a default facial expression in the human sense. Their faces moved through configurations that carried meaning she had spent years learning to read. The current configuration meant, as best as she could translate it, I know something, and I know that you know I know something, and we are going to discuss this. Saren, she said, you have visited Deck 4 12 times in the last 12 nights. Not 11, 12. She had not thought they were watching from the first night. She revised several assumptions very quickly. I have, she said. That space is. Outside my research parameters, I know. She kept her voice level. Heard a signal from my lab. I followed it. I found something that I believe you have significant obligations to tell me about. I would like to have that conversation now. A long pause. With Saren, pauses had weight. The obligations are not clearly defined by our agreement. I'm defining them, clearly. Right now. She was aware of her heart rate. She was aware of the coffee flask she was holding, which was a mundane thing to be aware of in this particular moment. She held on to it because it was hers. You've built a human being. You're running something in their nervous system that I can't identify. And you've been doing it in a sealed room on a joint research station that I am also staffed on, and you haven't told any of us. She kept her eyes on Saren's face, reading it. That's not research partnership. That's something else. Another pause. Then something shifted in Saren's expression, something she could not fully read, but which felt, against all her professional instincts, like relief. You are correct, Saren said. It is something else. Come with me. The Veth explained it over 4 hours in a conference room, with the lights, at a frequency that was uncomfortable for human eyes, sat through this as without complaint and without looking away. The deep architecture of living matter, Saren explained, was not a metaphor. The Veth had been studying something specific for a very long time. The mechanism by which consciousness persisted through change, their own physiology, assembled and modified over decades, was extraordinarily stable. They did not have the human experience of moment-to-moment selfhood. The feeling of being continuously the same person who woke up yesterday and remembered the day before. Their identity was structural, architectural, stable in the way a building is stable. It did not flow. It did not update. It held its shape. What the Vith had identified, centuries of study, was that this stability had a cost. Veth cognition was extraordinary in precision and range. It was almost entirely without the quality that human researchers called, variously, intuition, insight, creative leap, or lateral thought. The ability to connect two things that had no logical path between them and to do so correctly, not always, not reliably, with a frequency and a specificity that the Veth had spent a great deal of time trying to understand and had eventually concluded was connected. Exactly the instability they lacked. The human mind, perpetually updating, perpetually surprised by itself, made connections that a stable system would never seek, because a stable system would never not know what it knew. They had come to Earth because humans were, in their assessment, the most extreme example in the biological record of this particular cognitive style. They had proposed the Joint Research Station because they needed to understand it better. They had built Cain because they needed to understand it from the inside. The device at the base of Cain's skull was a data collection system. It monitored the activity of Kane's nervous system in fine detail and transmitted that data, encoded in a signal that Mara now recognized as the breathing sound she had heard from her lab, to Veth recording systems. Kane did not know this. Kane had been built, Saren explained, with complete memory systems but no memory, a mind fully formed but unwritten, because they needed to observe the process of a human mind accumulating experience. They had not intended for Kane to interact with anyone before the study's first phase was complete. Mara let all of this settle. Then she said, "Do they know they're being monitored? No. Do they know why they were built? No. Do they know that the device in their skull was put there without consent?" A pause that was longer than Saren's usual pauses. They were not able to give consent. They did not exist until the process was complete. That's not an answer to my question. Another pause. No, Saren said. They do not know. Mara put her coffee flask on the table. She looked at it. She looked at Saren. "I want to show you something," she said. And she pulled out her scanner and played the readings from her 4th visit to Deck 4. The night she had told Kane about the device, Kane had said, "I can feel it." She watched Saren's face while the data played. "Kane is already aware of it," she said. "Not what it does. That it's there. That something is running." She let the silence do its work. "You built a mind capable of knowing when it's being used. That's the thing you were looking for, isn't it? That's the quality you can't replicate. You built it and it's already ahead of your study design." The argument lasted 11 more days. Mara had not known she was capable of conducting an argument for 11 consecutive days. She discovered, as she had discovered various other things about herself in the last year, that necessity and stubbornness together could do a great deal. She was not unpleasant about it. She did not shout. She simply arrived at every discussion session with new data and a very specific position, and stayed until the session was over, and then came back the next day with more. Her position was this: Kane had a mind that had not consented to its creation, its instrumentation, or its isolation, and which could not retroactively consent to any of these things, but which was currently active, aware, and by every measure she had access to suffering the specific and identifiable distress of a conscious entity that did not know what it was or why it existed. The study could not ethically continue under its current parameters. It was not enough to argue that Kane had been built for this purpose, because the thing that made Kane interesting to the Vieth, the quality they were trying to understand, was precisely the quality that made Kane something more than a purpose. Purposes could not be frightened of the right things, the Veth argued. They argued well, with precision and patience, and Mara granted all their points as granted and returned, each time to the same position. Eventually, on the 8th day, Administrator Kor brought 4 other senior Veth into the discussion, and Mara understood this as a good sign. You did not need 4 people to defeat one person. You needed 4 people to witness a change of position. On the 11th day, Saren told her the study parameters would be revised. Mara went directly to Deck 4 and told Kane everything. She had expected many possible responses. Shock, anger, the specific anguish of learning that your existence was designed as an instrument. She had prepared carefully for all of them. Kane listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, the silence went on long enough that she began to be concerned. Then Kane said, "Show me the data." She showed them the scanner readings, the signal recording, the Veth's research documentation as far as she had been able to access it. Kane studied it with the same surgical attention they brought to everything. "This structure," they said, pointing to the device on the scan, "it's transmitting continuously." Yes, they're receiving the transmission now. Yes. Kane looked at the readout for a moment longer. Then they smiled. It was the first time Mara had seen them smile. It was small and lopsided, and it transformed their face in a way that was specific, personal, and entirely unmistakable. "Then let's give them something worth receiving," Kane said. What followed was not a confrontation. Mara had thought of it, in planning, as a confrontation, and she had prepared for one, and it turned out not to be that at all. It was a demonstration. Kane walked into the Veth's primary conference room on Deck 2 at 0900 station time, with Mara 2 steps behind them, and stood at the head of the table and looked around at the 7 Veth assembled there. Saren, Administrator Kor, and 5 others she had not formally met and said, "I would like to solve your problem." Core, whose body was the most architecturally complex of all the Veth on the station, turned toward Kane, with an attention that felt like physical weight. "You are not yet ready," Kane said. "That's not your determination to make. Not unkind, not aggressive. Simply a statement of fact, delivered with complete assurance. I know what you've been looking for. I know why you built me. I know what the device in my skull is doing." Pause. "I also know something you don't." Silence. "The thing you're trying to understand isn't in the data you're collecting," Kane said. "It's in the gap between the data and the thing the data is trying to describe. That gap is the thing, the jump, the connection that goes between 2 points that have no visible path. A breath. You can't collect it. You have to do it with someone. It requires 2 minds, not one, mine and one of yours." She watched Saren's face. Something moved across it that she had never seen there before, a configuration she could not read, which meant it was something new. "I am not asking your permission," Kane said. "I am offering a collaboration. Those are different things." The sessions began 3 days later. Mara was not involved in the technical details, which was correct. She was a neurologist, not a specialist in Veth cognitive architecture, and there were people better suited. What she did was sit in on the first session, at Kane's request, and watch. Kane and Saren sat facing each other across a table, with equipment between them that Mara did not entirely understand and found beautiful anyway. Filaments and light and the slow pulse of biological systems interfacing with each other. 2 different kinds of mind reaching toward the same question from opposite sides. Saren asked. Kane considered and responded. Process was slow and precise, and Mara had the sense, watching it, of watching 2 musicians who did not speak the same language finding, note by note, a key they shared. At the end of the session, Saren looked at Kane for a long time in silence. "You thought of 3 things during this session," Saren said finally. 3 connections. Things that were not given to you, not derived from the data they arrived. "Do you know how that happened?" "No," Kane said. "That's why it works." The months that followed changed the station in ways that were difficult to describe and impossible to have predicted. The Veth revised the parameters of their study 3 more times. They brought in 2 additional human researchers. People Mara recommended, people she trusted, people who arrived and were told the situation plainly, and who responded, each in their different way, with the specific human stubbornness that consists of rolling up your sleeves and getting to work. Formally proposed an expansion of the joint research mandate that the UN accepted within 4 months. Saren began, very tentatively, ask questions about human experience that were not for the study, questions that were, as best as Mara could tell, just questions. Kane became, over that same time, a person in the full irreducible sense. They argued with Mara. They developed opinions about food and music, and the correct way to run a calibration sequence. They formed a working relationship with Saren that was not friendship in the human sense, but was something that had its own language and its own warmth and its own occasional flash of humor. They started keeping a notebook, handwritten, which they showed to no one. Mara saw it once by accident, lying open on the platform in Deck 4 where Kane still spent time, though they now had quarters of their own. She did not read it, but she saw that the handwriting was very precise and very regular, and that the device at the base of Kane's skull was no longer transmitting. Kane had, through some process that no one fully understood, and that Kane declined to explain in detail, taught themselves to produce output on the monitoring frequency that was indistinguishable from genuine neural activity while routing their actual processing elsewhere. It was an elegant solution. It was a human solution. The Veth were, by the time they discovered it, more impressed than offended. 18 months after Mara had followed a breathing sound down to Deck 4, she was sitting in her lab at 0300, working on a paper about neural plasticity in novel cognitive architectures. And Kane came in without knocking. It was something they did, and sat down in the chair across from her desk. "Can't sleep," Mara said without looking up. "I don't sleep exactly," Kane said. "You know that. I know. It's a thing people say." Kane picked up the coffee flask from her desk. They had started drinking coffee 4 months ago, which Mara considered a significant milestone, and held it in both hands without drinking from it. Kor asked me today, Can said. I consider myself Veth or human, Mara looked up. What did you say? I said I consider myself Kane. A pause. They found that unsatisfying. What did you think of the question? Kane turned the flask over in their hands. They had beautiful hands. She still thought that, the way she had thought it, the first night, looking down at those precisely articulated fingers. I think the question assumes that those are the only two categories. Or that I need to fit one of them. Another pause. Kor built me to understand humanity. What they found was that the thing they wanted to understand isn't a category. It's a practice. It's what you do when you don't know. What you do instead of waiting until you know more. And what do you do instead of waiting? Kane set the flask down. They looked at her with the same dark brown eyes she had looked into on the first night, and in them she could see everything that had accumulated in 18 months. The arguments, the notebook, the sessions with Saren, the coffee, the lopsided smile, the 10,000 small specific things that were taken together a person. Move, Kane said. The paper Mara published 2 years later was the most cited work in xenocognitive research of the decade. It was about the relationship between uncertainty and innovation. About why a mind that knows it doesn't know something is more likely to find it than a mind that believes it has already optimized its approach. It was, in the way of all the best scientific papers, both a definitive answer to one question and an opening of 50 more. It had two authors, Mara Voss and Can Voss, the second name chosen because Can had eventually decided they wanted one. What the paper did not say, because it was a scientific paper and not a letter, was the thing Mara had been thinking about since 031 on the night she had first heard a living thing breathe in a sealed room and had followed the sound instead of going back to sleep. What she thought was this. The Veth had come to study humans because they wanted to understand the thing humans did when they did not know the answer. They had built Kane as a tool for that study. And in building Kane, they had accidentally demonstrated the very thing they were trying to understand. Because building a mind capable of genuine uncertainty meant building a mind capable of genuine surprise. And a mind capable of surprise would always, eventually, do something that surprised you. The Veth had built Kane to teach them what it meant to be human. Kane had taught them without a lesson plan, without a curriculum, without permission, using no tools other than the fact of being exactly what they were, new and afraid and curious and stubborn, and absolutely unwilling to be only the thing someone else had decided to make them. That was the answer. That had always been the answer. Mara thought, and felt it settle into her bones like something that had been waiting to be true. Then she turned back to her work, because there was more to do, and she had never been someone who stopped when there was more to do. In the lab down the corridor, Kane was writing in their notebook, and the handwriting was very precise, and the device at the base of their skull was quiet, and the station turned slowly in the dark, between the stars, carrying all of them, human and Veth, and the thing that was neither and both and something else entirely, toward whatever was waiting to be found.